In the spring of 2005, roughly 800 employees of Teatro, alla Scala, the orchestra, the chorus, the stagehands, the people who iron the costumes, possibly the pigeons living in the rafters, got together in a room and voted almost unanimously that their boss had to go. Their boss was Riccardo Muti, one of the most feared and revered conductors alive, a man whose baton technique had been compared to a surgeon's, and whose temperament had been compared to a thunderstorm that filed its own taxes. He had run La Scala for 19 years, longer than any music director since the war, and he went out not with a bang, not with a standing ovation, but with the operatic equivalent of 800 people changing the locks while he was at lunch.
To understand how a man this powerful got voted out of his own opera house, you have to understand that Muti did not merely conduct La Scala, he governed it. He arrived in 1986 as principal conductor of the Filarmonica della Scala, inherited the kind of authority Italian institutions usually reserve for cardinals, and proceeded to run the place with an attention to detail that bordered on the tyrannical. Musicians who worked under him describe rehearsals where a single wrong bow stroke could trigger a lecture on Verdi's intentions that lasted longer than the opera itself. This was, by all accounts, part of why the productions were so good. It was also part of why, by the early 2000s, a great many people at La Scala had developed the specific fantasy of Riccardo Muti falling into a canal. The spark that actually lit the fuse, though, wasn't Muti's conducting. It was politics. Theater politics, which is somehow worse than regular politics because everyone involved is also emotionally invested in Puccini. La Scala's general manager was a man named Carlo Fontana, and Fontana and Muti had spent years locked in the kind of low-grade institutional feud where two powerful men disagree about everything from budgets to programming, and neither one will just say what's actually bothering them. Muti wanted more control. Fontana wanted to keep his job. On February 24, 2005, the theater's board, with Muti's very public blessing, fired Fontana and lined up a replacement, a former administrator named Mauro Melli, to take over.
This is the part of the story where Muti, a man who had spent 2 decades enforcing absolute discipline on 800 employees, discovered that 800 employees can also enforce things. The orchestra did not care for Fontana's ouster, and more importantly, did not care for the version of La Scala's future in which Muti's preferred replacement ran the building unopposed. So they did the only reasonable thing available to a group of world-class musicians with strong feelings and even stronger union protections. They went on strike. Not a polite single-afternoon strike either. A rolling, escalating, opera-by-opera wildcat strike that started canceling performances one at a time, like a slow-motion demolition of the season. A staging of Mozart's Don Giovanni went dark. A ballet went dark. Milan's most prestigious cultural institution began resembling a company that had simply forgotten to open that day, and kept forgetting, on purpose, for weeks.
Muti's response to watching his own theater unravel was, in retrospect, not his finest strategic hour. He announced he would refuse to conduct the orchestra at all while the atmosphere, his word doing a tremendous amount of diplomatic lifting, remained so poisoned. This is a bit like a ship's captain announcing that he will not be steering the ship until everyone stops being upset about the iceberg. It did not calm anybody down. If anything, it confirmed to the staff that the man who had positioned himself as indispensable to La Scala's identity was perfectly willing to let the season burn rather than negotiate, which is exactly the kind of thing that makes 800 people start drafting a very strongly worded letter.
That letter arrived on March 16, 2005, in the form of a general assembly of the entire theater staff, orchestra, chorus, stagehands, everybody with a badge, who convened and voted, nearly unanimously, to demand Muti's resignation. Picture the scale of that for a second. This wasn't a disgruntled string section grumbling in the green room. This was the ushers agreeing with the tuba players, agreeing with the people who worked the fly system above the stage, all of them for once in perfect harmony, which is frankly the most impressive ensemble performance La Scala produced that entire season. The board tried to broker peace.
Muti, by most accounts, dug in. And then, in a detail that Italian tabloids treated like a state secret leaking out, Muti's wife, Cristina Mazzavillani, gave an interview to Italian Vanity Fair, admitting she wasn't sure her husband even wanted the job anymore, and that the situation had, in her words, slipped out of their hands entirely. When your own spouse is the one signaling your resignation to the press, the writing is not just on the wall, it's been set to music and given a standing ovation.
On April 2nd, 2005, after roughly 2 more weeks of increasingly pointless bickering, Riccardo Muti resigned as music director of La Scala. 19 years, the longest tenure of any conductor in the theater's post-war history, ended not with a gala or a farewell concert, but with a press statement and a general sense of relief radiating out of the pit like heat off a road. La Scala didn't rush to replace him with an equal. Daniel Barenboim took on an honorary Maestro Scaligero title and conducted regularly there for years afterward. But the full music directorship sat conspicuously unfilled, as if the building itself needed a while to stop flinching.
Muti, for his part, did not vanish into disgraced obscurity, because that is not a thing that happens to men who are, inconveniently for his critics, extraordinarily good at their jobs. Within a few years, he was music director of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, where, by all accounts, he behaved himself well enough to eventually be named music director emeritus for life, conducting popes and prestige orchestras on 3 continents, like a man who had simply relocated his empire 6,000 miles west. Which tells you something true and slightly unfair about power in classical music. You can lose a vote of 800 people who worked under you for 2 decades and still end up, a few years later, with your name on a hall in Chicago. La Scala got its theater back. Muti got a new one. Everybody eventually got what they wanted. They just had to fire each other first to figure out what that was.